Well, welcome, friends, to yet another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge. Smoke Camels for 30 days and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. Well, my friends, it is still the holiday season. This is the end of 3 weeks. You know, we start the new year with it's a really blowout 3 weeks of celebrations, from fasting to feasting, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur to Sukkot to Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. It's just a whirlwind of holidays that begin the new year. In Israel, the new semester doesn't start till the end of October. The usual what you hear a lot is after the holidays. In other words, we'll take care of this. So I'll talk to you about the business after the holidays, because these 3 weeks nothing really gets done. And this is really, since retirement, it's the first time that I get to experience these 3 weeks of holidays without having the pressure of work, because all my life, and I've always resented it. You're trying to celebrate holidays, and nobody even knows that it's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. What they have is meetings and work and everything, and now I can really spend this time enjoying the holiday, and especially Sukkot, which is 8 days, and the davening is like holiday davening. There's a lot to do during Sukkot. So it's a time when we're supposed to be happy, and you generally do feel. I love putting up the sukkah. I love the Lebanon Estrog, all the rituals of Sukkot. At the same time, here we are, and war just broke out in Israel. Hamas has shown the Israeli security defense system that this, and 50 years ago, the same thing happened with the Yom Kippur War. A sense of arrogance, nothing to worry about. We are on top of everything. And then you see, you don't know what's coming at all. This was planned for months, and Mossad and Shin Bet didn't have not an inkling of what was to come. And of course, it's a horrible tragedy, but it's just another one of the horrible tragedies that we're seeing everywhere around us. The last week I talked about Nagorno-Karabakh, which there was an article in Haaretz. Israel was one of the major suppliers of Azerbaijan for their assault on the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And 120,000 people, Armenians, who have been living in this area, by the way, for 2,000 years. This was the center of their homeland, really, and they have been now driven out. And that was really just catastrophic. So here we are, in a world in which every day the news is worse than the day before. And I still watch a lot of programs and read things on the climate issue. As you know, that this is I think that this is really driving everything else. But we don't have to wait for the AMOC to break down. We don't have to wait for tipping points. You can see that our social organizations, our governments, and violence around the world is already collapsing ahead of the environmental collapses. So that in the United States, what's happening is our government is becoming completely dysfunctional. I mean, you can't get anything done, literally. And the reason for that is that how do you have a government, and how do you have an election when you have on the one hand, a Republican Party, which is all MAGA Republicans and supporters of Trump, who's got 91 felony, charges against him, and it's an absurd situation where the government is just avoided shutdown by a hair's breadth, but they might as well shut down. There's really so dysfunctional. And the dysfunction is not a dysfunction in Congress, it's a dysfunction in the society. And the same thing is true in Israeli society. The divisions there between the settler colonialists, who are basically, these just similar to all the settler colonialists. They are brutal people, so you have on the one hand the settlers, and on the other hand the people who live in Tel Aviv, who are basically liberals and want to have a democratic socialist, a democratic secular state. There's no way for them to come together, and the dysfunction in society clearly lent a hand to the distraction that allowed Hamas to proceed with this brutal operation. But it's brutal everywhere. This is just horrible, and that's this situation that I'm coping with. Is how do you function day to day? How do you celebrate holidays? It's today is Shmini Atzeres, tonight's Simchas Torah. And you see in Israel the Orthodox are still dancing in the streets. They're not going to bother with anything. I mean, they're just going to dance in the streets. It's Simchas Torah, and so here we are. We're living in a world in which things are happening that we have really never seen before. And reversal of longevity. There's since 2019. Before the pandemic, we were going in the opposite direction because of the opioid pandemic, the opioid epidemic, and the violence and the epidemic of violence. We're killing our children with guns, and we cannot function as a society to solve problems. So we don't have to wait for the Amazon to collapse, for our government to collapse, for our for society to collapse, for our inability to function as a civilized society. This is what I mean by, the two things that are happening. One is that Western civilization, our civilization itself, is collapsing, and it's collapsing into violence. It's collapsing, into discord. So on the one hand, our civilization is collapsing, and on the other hand, we're in the midst of a mass extinction event. So nothing is going to get better. It's all going to become darker as we proceed. And the question is, how do we function from one day to the next? And how do we keep our heads above water? How do we keep ourselves from becoming utterly depressed at the collapse that's around us? I have no answer for that. The only advice I can give is take the Camel's challenge. Smoke camels for 30 days and see for yourself. I mean, that is the best advice that I have to offer. So it's a horrible week. I can't imagine that things are going to get better in the weeks to come. That this is the beginning in Israel, the beginning of a war that's going to be extremely brutal, and it's out of control. God knows where it's going to lead. But that's where we are this week. Another week of very bad news. So I'm going to leave it there, and take care. I guess I could say one more thing about this week. I had a run-in with COVID. It was my own fault, actually. I had two very nice people. We liked them, and they're painters, and they were doing some work on the porch and on the door, so that the front door was open, and since it was outside, and so I did not wear my mask when I was standing outside with them. It just seemed like we had enough distance between us, but there was a comfort that began to develop, so that that when they were done with the work, and I wanted to give them a check, they walked into the house, and there I was without a mask. They're in my house without a mask, um, and and remember, as far as we're concerned, uh, anyone without a mask is simply a vector of disease, and I hope it's going to be all right. But at you know we are people who have survived for the last 3 years without getting COVID. And if you look at one of the reasons for the reversal of longevity, it's because it's happening with the people between 60 and 79, my age, who are dying like flies from COVID. And that is a good part of this reversal of longevity. So uh, our solution is to try and protect ourselves as much as possible from being exposed to anyone who might be a vector of disease, which means that we live a very quiet life without we don't go to parties, we don't go to movies, we don't go to restaurants. We just stay away from people. What we do, which brings us enormous pleasure, is we ride our bicycles, we hike, we walk. We love to get out into the woods and get away, but we do that together. We do not socialize at all. Um, and so every time there is an exposure, you have to think about, oh God, I hope I will uh, not have made a terrible mistake. And, because sooner or later, it's almost inevitable that, the virus is going to be out there forever. We're going to have to live with this. This is permanent, not going to get better. And one of these things I read was that for the children, like we have grandchildren, they will be exposed thousands of times to COVID. So over as they mature and grow, their systems will develop ways to deal with with COVID. But for people like me, there's no hope. They're elderly. You can't develop an immunity. That's why the Native Americans died so quickly when the Europeans arrived from these diseases, because they had no natural immunity. So we're another reminder that we live in a very different world, a world that I described several years ago, where, in case you haven't noticed, the air that we breathe is toxic in more ways than one. We are living in a civilization and on a planet that is going through a major extinction event. And to survive it is not going to be possible. So the question only becomes, how do you live from day to day in a world that is heading towards extinction? And on Sukkot, we read just today the book of Ecclesiastes, which it's a wonderful book that is a reminder that the biblical canon was not chosen. It was not put together because of a theological orthodoxy, because the Ecclesiastes fundamentally rejects theodicy. There's no good at the end of time. There's no things don't work out. There's no heaven. I mean, it's just everything is vanity. Nothing it pays to do. It is really a powerful, poetic rejection of of a lot of what you would expect to be, traditional theology, where you have a world where the just are rewarded and the evil are punished, and there's none of that in Ecclesiastes. And that leads us, to Spinoza, who I also think is a source of comfort for those of us trying to survive in a world where there is no hope. At any rate, I can't help myself. It's Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. It's the end of the holidays, and I'm hoping that Karen and I can have a little joy this evening as we celebrate the end of the cycle of reading the Torah. That's all for this week. I'll be back next week with hopefully another edition of More Bad News, and I will see you then.